You have often been told that empaths are gentle creatures, fragile souls whose sensitivity is their curse and their gift. But you must understand, sensitivity is never passive. It is not a simple matter of being touched by the feelings of others, as though one were a leaf floating on the surface of the river. No, it is the river itself flowing through them, sometimes flooding, sometimes receding, but always carrying within it the sediments of countless lives, countless unspoken sorrows. And when that river grows polluted with pain that does not belong to them, when it becomes choked with the debris of manipulations and projections, then resentment begins to coil in the depths, like a serpent in the mud. Empaths do not seek revenge as the world imagines it. Their revenge is not plotted in schemes or delivered in acts of cruelty. It is far more subtle and far more dangerous for the empath when turned resentful. Wields a weapon that is invisible but devastating, the withdrawal of their light. And the one who is fed on that light, the narcissist, the manipulator, the unconscious thief of vitality, suddenly finds themselves in a barren landscape, starved of the warmth they once took for granted. Antied. But let us go deeper, because the outer form of revenge is never the true story. We must look at the psychic movement, the archetypal drama that unfolds when an empath begins to see through the veil of their own compulsions. For years, perhaps decades, the empath has played the role of healer, a res-square Christ figure in miniature, carrying the wounds of others as though salvation depended on their tears. They are drawn into relationships with those who are broken, and in these broken ones they glimpse a reflection of their own shadow child, and so they stay pouring out, giving endlessly until they are emptied. It is here that resentment begins, not as an act of will, but as an eruption of the unconscious. A dream may reveal it. An empath might see themselves walking through a house that is not theirs, picking up objects, carrying them until their arms ache, only to find that the house is endless with no exit. They wake in despair, realizing they have been carrying burdens that never belonged to them. The resentment is not toward the people alone, but toward the archetype itself, the invisible compulsion that made them believe they were only valuable when suffering for others. How you must see that this resentment is not petty. It is not simply anger at mistreatment. It is a soul revolving against its own one-sidedness. It is the psyche crying out enough of being the sacrificial lamb, enough of being devoured. And in that cry there is something profoundly creative. For when an empath resists the old pattern, when they withdraw their giving, they are not merely punishing another. They are liberating themselves from an archetypal possession. This liberation feels like betrayal to those who depended on them. The narcissist who once drew sustenance from their compassion experiences it as abandonment, even destruction. But to the empires, this revenge is not revenge at all. It is reclamation. It is the return of their soul to their own center. In the language of alchemy, resentment is the fire that blackens the vessel. It is the Negrado stage, the darkening when everything once pure and shining is reduced to ash. But without Negrado, there can be no transformation. Only when the empath allows themselves to feel the bitterness without denying it, without sanctifying it, does the alchemical work begin. For in those ashes lies the possibility of a new identity. Me that is no longer enslaved to the archetype of martyrdom. But let me speak plainly, because there is a danger here. If the empath does not recognize the deeper meaning of their resentment, they may project it outward. They may become bitter, cynical, even cruel, wielding their sensitivity like a dagger rather than a bomb. In this state, they become the very thing they once despised, exploiters of emotion, manipulators of guilt. This is the shadow of the empath, the avenger who cloaks violence in the language of justice. Therefore, the true revenge of the empath is paradoxical. It is not to wound others, but to cease wounding themselves for the sake of others. It is to let the manipulator starve, not by striking them, but by refusing to feed them. It is the silent act of disappearing, of saying no, of closing the psychic doors. To the narcissist, this feels like a death. To the empath, it feels like resurrection. You may ask, what does this mean for you listening now? It means that when you feel resentment rising in your soul, do not rush to suppress it with moral platitudes. Do not say to yourself, I must be kind, I must forgive. That is the very prison of the archetype. Instead, stand to your resentment as a messenger. Ask, what is it revealing about my boundaries? Where have I given myself away in the name of love, when in truth it was fear? Fear of being forgotten, fear of being unloved, fear of being unnecessary. The Empire's resentment is the soul's rebellion against falsiness. And when you heed it, when you honor its message, you find that your revenge is not destruction but transformation. You no longer need to strike at the one who harmed you, because your very withdrawal exposes them. Their emptiness becomes visible, and you are free. Do not think this is easy. The path of individuation is never easy. To stand apart from those you once saved feels like betrayal. To let others face their own darkness without rescuing them feels like cruelty. But it is the deepest form of love. Not love that enslaves, but love that liberates. The archetype of the empath belongs to the wounded healer, Cairn, the centaur who could not heal his own wound, yet taught others the mysteries of medicine. His wound gave him wisdom, but also bound him to endless service. Many empaths live under Chiron's spell, believing that their suffering is holy, but when resentment breaks the spell, the empath steps beyond Chiron into something greater. They realize that healing begins not with carrying others but with reclaiming themselves. And this reclamation, this sacred selfishness, is the revenge no one expects. It does not scream. It does not strike. It does not destroy. It simply withdraws, like the tide pulling back from the shore, leaving the scavengers stranded. Those who once depended on your endless giving will rage, will accuse, will play the role of victim. But you will know their suffering is not your responsibility. Your revenge is your freedom. So listen now deeply. If you have felt the poison of resentment rising in you, do not dismiss it. It is not a flaw. It is not a sin. It is a sign that your soul is ready to reclaim its fire. The question is not whether you will take revenge, but whether you will understand the form it must take. Will you let it consume you into bitterness, or will you let it transform you into one who stands in their own sovereignty? When resentment ripens in the soul of the empath, it first appears as a whisper that something is profoundly wrong. For so long you have lived as though your worth depended on how much pain you could absorb from others. You convinced yourself that love was synonymous with sacrifice, that to bleed for another was the highest virtue. And perhaps you even cloaked this in spiritual language, saying that it was your destiny, your calling, your divine birth. But beneath the sanctity of such words, the psyche begins to tremble, for no archetype can dominate the soul forever without cost. You see, every archetype is double-edged. The healer who binds wounds may also become the prisoner of wounds. The lover who unites may also dissolve into the other, and lose themselves in the empath carrying the collective shadow of humanity, risks being devoured by the very darkness they try to redeem. Resentment is the psyche's way of saying enough of this one. Sightedness enough of being enslaved to an image that denies the fullness of the self. Dreams reveal this truth with a clarity sharper than waking thought. Imagine the dream of the empaths who wanders into a garden filled with starving animals. She feels pity and begins to feed them from her own flesh. At first the animals seem grateful, but soon they gnaw at her relentlessly, their hunger endless, insatiable. She cries out, but no one me to help, and she wakes with her body aching as though truly bitten. This dream does not lie. It shows the truth of being consumed, and the resentment that follows is the revolt against that dream becoming reality. Yet here lies the danger. If you cling to resentment without transformation, it turns corrupting the soul like stagnant water. Resentment can chain you to the past, forcing you to rehearse old wounds in endless repetition. You may find yourself reliving conversations, plotting responses that were never spoken, feeding fantasies of justice that never arrive. This is a shadow trap, for in that state you are still bound to the one who hurt you, still feeding them with your energy, even in hatred. Thus, the Empire's revenge must move beyond bitterness. True revenge, if we must use that word, is not retaliation but transcendence. It is to step out of the very drama that once ensnared you. The narcissist expects you to fight, to plead, to justify, to explain. When you refuse, when you fall silent, when you walk away without ceremony, that is a blow they never expected. And yet, paradoxically, it is not a blow. It is the simple act of no longer consenting to bondage. In psychological terms, this moment is individuation. It is the recognition that the self cannot be reduced to one archetypal mask. You are not merely the healer, not merely the empath. You are the totality of light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, love and anger, creation and destruction. And when resentment awakens you to this truth, you begin to integrate the disowned parts of yourself. You learn to say no, not from cruelty, but from wholeness. Consider the myths of Persephone. She is the maiden carried off into the underworld, forced to live in Hades' realm. At first, she is the victim, powerless, consumed by another's desire. But when she tastes the pomegranate seeds, she accepts her role as queen of the underworld. She's no longer merely victim, but sovereign, moving between worlds. The empath must taste the fruit of their resentment. Only then do they claim sovereignty over their own inner underworld. This transformation frightens those around you. They will accuse you of being cold, selfish, even cruel. They will say you have changed as though it were a crime. But understand, these accusations are confessions. They reveal that what they valued was not you, but what they took from you. To withdraw your giving is to them an act of violence, but to you it is an act of love. Love for the self, love for the inner child who has suffered too long, resentment. Then is the beginning of wisdom. If you have the courage to follow it to its root, it forces you to ask, why did I believe my worth depended on endless sacrifice? Why did I remain silent when I was drained? What part of me feared being unloved unless I was indispensable? And when you confront these questions honestly, you discover that beneath resentment lies grief. Grief for the years lost. Grief for the self-abandonment endured. Grief for the innocence betrayed. It is necessary to feel this grief fully, for only through grief can the alchemical fire purify the bitterness. Resentment without grief becomes vengeance. Resentment with grief becomes renewal. You mourn not only what was done to you, but what you did to yourself in the name of love. And in mourning you release it. Now I must warn you again. There is a seduction in playing the role of the avenger. The empires once resentful may turn their gift into a weapon. They may see too deeply into others' wounds and exploit that knowledge for power. They may. You inflict shame with surgical precision, justifying it as balance. But this is not individuation. It is possession by the shadow. When you become the mirror of your oppressor, you have not escaped the archetype. You have merely shifted roles within it. The true path is harder. It is the path of withdrawing projection. No longer do you see the narcissist as your persecutor alone, nor yourself as their perpetual victim. You see instead that the relationship was a mirror of your own unconscious compulsion to save, to be needed. You see that their hunger was your unacknowledged fear of being empty. And when you accept this, the bond dissolves. You are free. Not because you destroyed them, but because you reclaimed yourself. Think of fire. Fire can consume forests in rage, leaving ash and ruin. But fire also transforms clay into pottery or into gold, food into nourishment. Resentment is fire. If you unleash it blindly, it burns indiscriminately. If you contain it within the vessel of consciousness, it transforms you. The empath who learns this becomes not bitter but fierce with clarity. They no longer offer themselves to be consumed, but neither do they need to consume others. They saint, and as fire tenders, guardians of their own flame. Do you see now why their revenge is not what you expect? It is not the destruction of another, but the refusal to be destroyed. It is not the scream of rage, but the silence of withdrawal. It is not punishment, but liberation, and the shock of this liberation reverberates outward, shaking those who fed upon their light. For nothing is more terrifying to a manipulator than the one who no longer plays the game. So when you feel resentment rise, do not fear it. Do not push it away as unspiritual, unworthy, unloving. Hold it, study it, descend into it as you would descend into the underworld. For within it lies the seed of your sovereignty. Within it lies the moment you stop giving yourself away. The moment you realize that your love is not valuable because it suffers, but because it is whole. And when you emerge from this descent, you will find that the world looks different. You will walk with a presence others cannot quite define. You will no longer be an easy target for those who exploit. You will not need to announce your boundaries. They will radiate from you, and those who once sought to devour you will find no entrance. This is your true revenge, not their downfall but your rising. If we look more deeply into the psychic drama of resentment, we discover that it is not merely an interpersonal phenomenon. It is archetypal. When you feel anger, resentment rises. You are not simply angry at the person. You are standing in the threshold of a myth that has repeated for centuries. The myth is this: the healer who has been exploited finally turns their gaze inward. This is the moment when the archetype of the savior collides with the archetype of the avenger. And it is in that collision that transformation is possible. But the psyche resists transformation. It clings to the familiar even when the familiar is poisonous. You may hear the voices of your upbringing. Be kind. Be forgiving. Endure. To resist is selfish. And so you push resentment down. You smother it. You pretend it is not there. Yet the unconscious does not obey your conscious will. The resentment you deny seeps out in dreams, in illness, in subtle acts of sabotage. You may notice yourself growing fatigued around the very people you once served with devotion. You may feel headaches, tension in the chest, stomach nodes. These are the body's way of carrying the resentment you refuse to name. And here lies a dangerous truth. Resentment repressed becomes depression. The empath who cannot admit their anger at being used will turn that anger inward. They will say, I am weak. I am failing. I am not loving enough. Thus, resentment, denied its rightful expression, becomes self-hatred. This is why so many empires find themselves exhausted, ill, even despairing. Though they have committed no outward crime, their very goodness distorted by repression becomes their torment to heal. You must allow resentment to speak, not to dominate, but to speak. Imagine sitting with the serpent of resentment, hearing its hiss. It tells you have given too much. You have abandoned yourself. You have allowed others to drink from your well until it ran dry. And now you must guard the well, or it will never flow again. The serpent is not your enemy. It is your guardian awakening you to boundaries. This is why I say that the empath's revenge is not what you expect. It is not the striking back, the venom, the retaliation. It is the sudden unapologetic guarding of the well. It is the declaration, my water is mine. It may be shared but never stolen. And this declaration shakes those who have fed upon you, for they never imagined you capable of such sovereignty. Think of the dream of the locked door. The empath dreams of standing in a house with countless rooms, people entering and exiting freely, taking what they please. Suddenly a key appears in their hand. They lock the door to one room. The others protest, bang, accuse. But the empath holds the key and feels relief. That key is resentment transmuted into authority. That is the psychic revenge, to hold the key at last. Do not mistake me. This path is painful. When you first close the door, those who once relied on your openness will scream. They will call you selfish, cruel, ungrateful. They may accuse you of betraying the very essence of your empathy. And in that moment, your heart will waver. You will ask yourself, am I truly cruel? Am I becoming like them? But listen carefully. You are not becoming cruel. You are becoming whole. You are no longer trapped in the one-sided archetype of the giver. You are balancing it with the archetype of the guardian. Without that balance, there is no individuation, only sacrifice, until death. Let me tell you a story from the unconscious. A woman once dreamed she was in a vast cathedral kneeling at the altar. Behind her stood a long line of people waiting to receive blessings from her. She turned, and one by one they placed their hands on her head, draining her strength. She felt herself collapse. Yet she continued to kneel. Then suddenly in the dream she rose. She turned to the altar and saw a mirror. In the mirror was not her exhausted face, but the image of a lioness. Fierce, unyielding, she awoke in terror, yet also in power. The dream revealed her hidden revenge, not to strike the people down, but to remember her own lioness nature, to stand upright. This is the archetypal journey of the empath in resentment. You begin kneeling, serving, bleeding. You end standing fierce, so radiant, and those who once relied on your silence will tremble, for your silence is no longer submission but command. Now let us return to the psychological depths. Why do empaths attract those who exploit? Because the unconscious seeks completion. You are drawn not by accident but by the hidden wound within you that says, if I save another, perhaps I will save myself. The narcissist, the manipulator, mirrors your disowned need for recognition. They exploit your giving because you cannot yet give to yourself. When resentment awakens, it is not only against them, it is against the lie you have lived. It is the moment you say, I will no longer seek myself in the emptiness of another. This recognition is terrifying. For if you are not the savior, who are you? If you are not endlessly giving, what remains of your identity? Many empires collapse here, clinging again to their martyrdom, rather than facing the abyss of not knowing themselves. But if you endure the abyss, If you allow yourself to be no one for a time, you find that beneath the role of savior lies the vastness of the self that is not defined by giving or withholding but by wholeness. This is why the empath's revenge is not an act but a state of being. It is the shift from compulsive giving to conscious being. When you embody this state, your very presence is different. You radiate strength without effort. You no longer explain, justify, defend. You are simply yourself, and that is enough. And those who once exploited you find themselves powerless, for they cannot manipulate one who no longer fears abandonment. Here is the ultimate paradox. The empaths are. Revenge is love, not sentimental love, not the self-abandoning love of before, but fierce love rooted in truth. It is love that refuses to participate in lies, love that says no, love that allows others to face their own shadows rather than rescuing them from the necessary fire. This love may look cruel, but it is divine. It is the love that liberates rather than enslaves. Therefore, when you feel resentment, do not see it as weakness. See it as the doorway to this love. Enter it. Descend into its bitterness. Let it strip away the false self that was built on martyrdom. And when you emerge, you will no longer be the empath chained to others' wounds. You will be the sovereign who chooses when to give and when to withhold, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. This is individuation. This is the alchemy of resentment. This is the revenge no one expects. You may think that the journey ends when the empath withdraws, when the resentment becomes the catalyst for boundaries, when the old cycle of sacrifice collapses. But no, this is not the end. This is only the midpoint of transformation, for the true mystery is not merely in breaking the pattern, but in discovering what emerges when the soul is no longer bound to archetypal compulsion. Let me take you deeper. Every time resentment burns within you, it points to something sacred that has been violated, the dignity of yourself. And when you honor that resentment, when you allow it to cleanse you, you begin to feel the presence of an inner figure who had long been hidden, the guardian of your soul. In Jungian terms, this is a new archetype rising, one that balances the healer with the warrior, the nurturer with the sovereign. Without this balance, empathy collapses into servitude. With this balance, empathy becomes wisdom. You will notice a subtle shift in your relationships. No longer do you enter as a rescuer. No longer do you feel compelled to carry another's suffering. Instead, you stand as witness. You hold space, but you do not dissolve into the other. You see their wounds clearly, but you also see their capacity to face them. And by refusing to intervene compulsively, you awaken something in them too, the demand to stand on their own. This is the empire's greatest gift, when they are free not to heal others by carrying their burden, but to reveal to others their own hidden strength. Now the world may resist this. People will long for the old version of you, the endlessly giving, endlessly forgiving, endlessly available soul. They will test you. They will push your boundaries trying to find cracks, and each time they push, resentment will rise again, reminding you, do not return to the old role. Each surge of resentment is not regression. It is a reminder of your sovereignty. If you listen, resentment becomes not poison but compass guiding you towards the truth of who you are. But beware, for the shadow still waits. If you cling to resentment too tightly, if you make it your identity, you risk becoming possessed by it. You may begin to define yourself not as sovereign, but as victim. You may carry the story of betrayal like a banner, telling and retelling it, ensuring that your past pain becomes your only source of meaning. This is the danger of those who cannot let go. They feed their lives on the very poison they once sought to escape. So the final act of transformation is forgiveness. Not forgiveness as sentimentality, not forgiveness as denial, but forgiveness as liberation. To forgive does not mean to excuse. It means to withdraw the psychic energy that binds you to the other. It means to release the chain of resentment that ties you to the oppressor. You no longer need their downfall because that downfall is inevitable. When your light is gone, you no longer need to explain yourself because your very being explains all. Forgiveness here is not for them. It is for you. It is the cutting of the final thread. At this stage, the empath no longer seeks revenge at all because they have discovered the higher paradox. Revenge was always about freedom, and freedom has already arrived. They look at those who once drained them, and they feel nothing, not hatred, not longing, not rage, only a quiet recognition. That chapter has ended. I have taken back my soul. And in that recognition, the cycle is broken forever. Do you see how unexpected this is? The world anticipates vengeance in forms it can measure: anger, retaliation, punishment. But the Empire's true revenge transcends all of this. It is invisible to the ordinary eye. It looks like silence, absence, indifference. But in the psychic realm, it is thunder. For the manipulator, the narcissist, the explorer cannot bear the void. They cannot survive without the empath's energy. And when the empath withdraws it, it is as though the sun itself has set on their world. That is the devastation of true revenge. It requires no action. Only being. In myths across cultures, this theme repeats. In Norse myth, Bulra, the god of light, is slain and the world falls into mourning. In Greek myth, when Piphanini descends into Hades, the earth itself becomes barren. The withdrawal of light is the archetypal revenge. And you, as an empath, carry that same light. When you withdraw it from those who exploit it, they wither. But unlike the gods of myth, you do not withdraw to punish. You withdraw to live. And what does this mean for the path of individuation? It means that resentment is not the end, but the threshold. It awakens you to the falsity of your old role. But it must not define you. You must pass through resentment into sovereignty, through bitterness into wisdom, through vengeance into liberation. This is the alchemy of the soul. Negredo the blackening must give way to albedo the whitening, and finally to rubo the reening, the fullness of life, integrated a whole and radiant. Imagine now, if you dare, your future self standing beyond resentment. You are not drained, not bitter, not enslaved. You are luminous, grounded, shakable. You feel the emotions of others, but you are not consumed by them. You love, but not at the expense of yourself. You forgive, but without forgetting. You walk as one who knows the depths of shadow, yet carries the light of consciousness. This is what resentment was leading you to all along. Not revenge, but transformation. So I say to you, let resentment come when it must. Do not fear it. Do not drown in it. Let it speak. Let it burn. Let it reveal the chains you did not know you carried, and then step through. Step into the sovereignty that is your birthright. Step into the fullness of yourself, where you are no longer defined by wounds, but by wholeness. And when others ask, what became of you? Where is the one who once gave us everything? You will smile. You will say nothing. For your silence will be your answer, and your presence will be your revenge. Thus the empath, once resentful, becomes not destroyer but creator, not avenger but sovereign, not victim but self. And that is a mystery greater than any expected revenge. For it is the mystery of individuation itself, the journey from bondage to freedom, from shadow to light, from resentment to